Alright everyone, there will only be one new tech exclusive today. This one, because it refers to my Substack and it's kind of an important article, I did also want to put it on YouTube. And that is that I now judge that Joe Biden is officially the worst US president we've suffered under. Now, link in the description, I'll pin it down below, of course, to the Substack article that I wrote. And it refers to a Substack article actually that I made at the end of December, which is that then a lot of people were saying, well, 2021 is the worst year in US history. And that's tied in a lot with Joe Biden, because a lot of the problems that people were judging, the economy, diplomacy, etc., the executive branch has undue sway over, you could say, to an excessive degree. At the time, though, I pointed out, and you can read this at your leisure, you should definitely join me on Substack because it is fun. I promise not to overwhelm your email feed. I'll do like a post or two every month, probably. Maybe 3 if there's like some major breaking news. When you looked at it, though, the economy was bad. And this is last year. You got a bad economy, but it's not the Great Depression. It's arguably more similar to like parts of the Carter administration, and in some measures not quite so bad. You had a major foreign policy blunder in Afghanistan, but you didn't have any new war starting. If anything, you do have to say, well, I mean, we did get out of Afghanistan. It's just we did it belatedly and in the shittiest way possible. Hence the disaster. But it wasn't Pearl Harbor. It wasn't, hey, we ignored all the intel that we're about to have half of our Navy hazarded in the Pacific. Let's just leave the ships at dock. Everything will be fine. Make sure to move the aircraft carriers out first, though. Hint, hint, they knew. You have social problems. You have a rise in crime, but it's not as high as crime was in the late 80s, early 90s. Not even close. It's a lot higher than it should be. It's a reversal of a trend that started actually in the 2000s under Bush, of all people, partially because gun control starts to decrease. And now, unfortunately, you got more social alienation, labor force participation issues, and so forth, and that's driving crime. But a lot of it was lockdown related. People got bored and desperate and, they ended up on drugs and shit. And all of a sudden, crime rose. I wonder why. You had all these problems. But in no singular measure could you say that it was the worst it's ever been. Again, bad economy but not the Depression. Bad crime but not 1989. Big foreign policy blunder, but there have been worse. You have a president who's out to lunch, but you've had several of them already. Woodrow Wilson suffered a stroke and was effectively incapable of holding office. For a very long time, his wife was the de facto prime minister of the United States for her husband. That is the truth. This has been retroactively admitted to by her effectively as well. This is something that they sweep under the rug of history because Wilson was a big-time global hawk. You've got George W. He played a moron on TV. I realize that it was mostly an act, but he was completely incompetent. And you've had other presidents that arguably at times, Reagan's second term was arguably a little loopy. He wasn't the Gipper that he was in 1982. These are real things. But when you combine them all, it was definitely one of the crummiest years. We can say that. However, now you've got an additional major failure. You've got Biden effectively restarting the Cold War. Now, you can look at this in a number of ways. You can say, well, it's the result of his diplomacy failed in Russia. That's how I look at it. He sent Kamala over. He sent Blinken over. He was doing phone calls with Putin. And at the last minute, he pulled back and let Macron take a swing at it. And Macron basically just got laughed at by Putin. No action was taken, and it's from partially before his presidency when he was vice president. Crimea gets invaded when Obama is in office. Nothing happens under Trump. I wonder why. They think it's a conspiracy. Well, his pawn was in there to weaken NATO. Well, that never happened. NATO's weaker now. That's why people are rearming. They suddenly are doing what Trump told them to do years ago. Strengthening NATO in the process. Interesting. Almost like I've heard the idea before from an orange man who everyone called the devil. Under Obama, Crimea gets invaded. Now, the foreshock was the invasion of Georgia over a breakaway region there. Russia has done this before. It invaded Crimea and annexed it, with nary a shot fired in many cases, saying, it's full of ethnic Russians, they voted to be part of us, so, Ukraine doesn't even exist. And the Ukrainians at the time warned that there would be further problems. It definitely helped to promote Eastern separatists in Ukraine that they already had to deal with, sort of like an IRA-style situation. Russia had already done this. NATO did nothing because they weren't pressured to do anything. Trump attempted to strengthen NATO so that at the very least there would be a bulwark there. Now you've got Orban in Hungary and others saying, well, we don't expect NATO might even protect us if Russia does something. They might blink and step back and say, well, we don't want to start World War III and refuse. And I've warned about this for years. It is exactly that scenario you have to worry about. The scenario you have to worry about is that one of the nuclear powers decides, hey, you know what? The mad thing, they're not going to do anything. It's bullshit. Their deterrent lacks any teeth. I'm going to move in and see what they do. They might try a proportional response. I'm not crazy enough to use battlefield nukes, but I'll fuck with them in the standard sense. Russia, or China, or any other major player, the United States, could end up doing an incursion into another nuclear state's direct sphere or something, risking nuclear war, and then it never breaks out. At that point, MAD breaks down, and that power probably gets big balls and goes further thinking it can rule the world, and then eventually the enemy, out of desperation, has to retaliate with nuclear weapons. That's probably, by the way, how nuclear war will erupt if it does. Unless it's through sabotage or just a mistake, and we've come very, very close to that hundreds of times already. Because of this, the failure of Biden's policies towards Eastern Europe, because of his bloviating rhetoric thereafter, his misuse of the Russian invasion of Ukraine, by the way, for propaganda for entirely political gain purposes, because of his out-of-touch attitude towards the necessity of having a strong energy-based economy when you're dealing with the number 2 energy exporter in the world, and because of his lack of knowledge about all things Eastern Bloc, because he has no private experience with regards to business, because of all these things, Joe Biden now has a second major foreign policy blunder, bigger than Afghanistan. Yeah, Afghanistan falling to the Taliban is not a fun situation, although I do admit the memes thereafter of the Taliban on roller coasters and shit, at least they were funny. It's interesting that their regime has better sense of humor than Joe Biden's administration does it. Jen Psaki, I don't think that she's capable of smiling after cracking a joke that's not Schadenfreude. That was bad. Wasted a bunch of time and money and effort. Nothing happened, and now the Taliban controls the country. We just consolidated a really weak pawn state that made it easier for them to take over than before. That's what we did. But Ukraine and the entrance of a nuclear power into the war footing is more important. That could involve Afghanistan down the road. The Taliban tacitly sides with BRICS and China. Oh, lots more minerals for the Chinese. This could become a very major problem, and Biden's reaction is buy energy-efficient cars that cost $50,000, $60,000 a piece. So you have problems with the fuel price rising? I'm sure that you can afford a new car that costs twice as much as the last one that you bought. That's really sensible. Drive less. Why don't you carpool to work? Why do you live out in the middle of nowhere? Why don't you walk to work 15 miles uphill both ways? The out-of-touch optics of the administration, which are very useful for his enemies' propaganda, I will claim, compact the scenario even more. He has become the worst president because now, before, you had a big foreign policy blunder, but it wasn't legendary. It was pretty fucking bad with Afghanistan. I ranked it, I think, at number 4 on this failure list because other considerations are worse. Since then, since the end of 2021, you've got more inflation, you've got a stalled out jobs market, labor force participation included there. You've got another major foreign policy blunder. You've got Biden literally having his phone calls ignored, and now you, as a topping for this, you have the Saudi Arabians optioning, well, maybe we'll trade oil with ruble and yen. Now, of course, that's not a huge problem. Some people are saying it's the end of the dollar as the world reserve currency. That's not really what this means. It's just another in a long string of failures of Bidenomics, which I believe will be reversed. I think the next administration will probably not have Biden's neolib globalist policies in mind. I think they'll be a little bit surprised at how far the defortification can go when the midterms at the state level are swept by populists. That's what I'm hoping. I'm hoping for a quick restoration of proper order in the U.S. Republic so the entire Western world has a leader instead of just a steward and a vegetable named Joe Biden, who, yes, I officially rank him lower than W. And trust me, I'm not given over to hyperbole. Some people have said I'm too restrained. in my criticism of Biden. Well, can't you see he's worse than Bush? Can't you see he's crazier than Woodrow Wilson? Well, yeah, now I guess I have to say that you're right now, although you weren't 4 months ago. In my opinion, he had not yet crossed the threshold of worst president then. Just like 2021 couldn't be the worst year. 2022 is shaping up to easily give 2021 a run for its money, and we're only a fourth of the way through it. I think that the writing is on the wall. This is not going to be the best year in U.S. history. Although there is one good thing, Russia managed to apparently end the pandemic because nobody's talking about it anymore. You'll notice the masks go off and the Ukrainian armbands go on. Imagine, fascinating. That's about all. Peace out.